Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we start off with the whole, I can't remember, I'm probably doing this a little out of order, but let's start off with the whole Chester thing. I think this was a very important episode for Chester and Cecile in many different regards. Chester in particular because this is his first full, okay, I'm running things. I'm kind of quote unquote the new Cisco, even though he wouldn't want to be seen as the new Cisco. It's just I'm just Chester. But obviously finding that middle ground is kind of hard for him because he's redecorating his lab and everything, and then Caitlin comes and is oh, this is different. It's just different seeing none of Cisco stuff in here. For him, he started feeling bad. It's right, I came in here just taking a spot. It's no, you're in charge now. Cisco left you with all this stuff, so don't feel like this isn't home. This is just as much your home as it is anyone else's. This you belong here. And him turning on the speakers and everything and dancing, it's just I like that. But obviously it's it kind of doesn't work. So he decides, I'm gonna go get some stuff that can help out with this. Goes to the basement and it's there's some noises there. I'm what's going on there? Was someone in here? I was wondering if it had anything to do with Cecile or something like that. Once again, I don't remember if I'm doing this. Did the Cecile stuff pop up first or did this pop up first? Either way, I was like, that's so interesting. I'm oh, someone was in here looking for something. And then you see Barry. I was what? I was why is he acting weird? And then Iris is there. I was oh my God. And then slowly Chester's figuring out. He's oh. And Barry's no. And then he's telling, oh, Iris, fix your hair. Your shirt's inside out. Oh yeah, we were just rearranging stuff. Yeah, I told him this is, it's side note, why would you, very, very exhibitionist of you to bang it out at your work. I guess it's they figured no one comes down there that often. So, but I mean, you could literally go anywhere in the world in the blink of an eye. Why bang it out at Star Labs? That's crazy. I mean, hey, I guess when the mood strikes, it strikes. That's crazy. And it's just Barry's oh, we were just having a kid and trying to, it's me and Iris, we were thinking about having a kid. He's nah. Chester's I really don't. No, that's awesome. That's great. Just, I don't need to know the details. It's it's weird because it's weirdly enough, it's walking in on your boss having sex. That's gnarly, dude. That's crazy. But, circling back, obviously this ties into the Cecile situation. I actually wasn't expecting us to get an answer to that so soon, because in retrospect, we kind of got answers to what went down, and it's oh, so she's only literally been like this for one episode, because the whole thing with obviously the storm strike from Psych, I was okay, I figured that had to have something to do with it, because that's what happened to her recently. So I was what's up with that? So basically, she sends Joe on her way, but then she also gets Barry's help, oh, I need your help with a case. But he was oh, didn't we already have a case like this before? And then she's oh, what's going on? And it's I'm not Cecile, and I need you out of the way. And then she kind of puts Barry into a brain coma, because we see that Cecile, the real Cecile, because we find out it's locked up in a cell. And interestingly enough, all of this kind of definitely it makes me think of Legion a little bit, in particular Farouk, a.k.a. the Shadow King. They're very interesting, because it's oh, he was kind of a psychic parasite. We're dealing with a psychic parasite in this regard. I think it's so fascinating. And especially the way fake Cecile is Psycho Cecile, as they kind of refer to her later on, was just manipulating the team. It's oh, Barry, it's oh, maybe you could read his emotions and kind of find out who's potentially doing this to Barry. And she's oh, okay, I'll try. And in fact, she's half-assing it, being oh, I see this, I see that, oh, there's some golden glow, a mask or something. And then Chester's the one that figures out, oh, I know what it is. So we get a little more insight into the Psycho Pirate situation. I didn't even, once again, I love that they're bringing that back. That's a 2019 storyline. No, 2018, right? Elseworlds was 2018, 2019, because obviously it was before season 1 of Batwoman. So it's just kind of crazy. It's been a couple years for you to kind of bring that back. That's kind of interesting. But we find out, oh, the mask was taken from him and put in a museum. And it's okay. And Cecile's oh, if only we could get the mask, because if we got the mask, we could kind of do some stuff to because basically we find out that this thing is ancient. Apparently Gilgamesh had it way back in the day, and it basically it finds a new host, and once again very similar to Farouk. from Legion. So I thought that was kind of an interesting development, especially because David, Legion himself, kind of went through a slightly similar thing because of the whole Farouk situation. So, but her Cecile, like I said, weaving like everything behind the scenes and everything was incredible. Chester calling in Sue for help. I was like, yo! And so it's like, right, we're going to break into the museum. It's like, well, you can't really go to the trouble explaining like, well, this item, we need it. I mean, I get, it makes you wonder, could Barry as the Flash have shown up like, hey, I kind of need this mask? And that would have drawn too many questions. So it's like, well, we don't have a speedster kind of just help us around that. So just go into the museum and break into it. It's like, we have a bona fide, like, kind of world-class skilled thief. So, Sue getting her, like, Catherine Zeta-Jones going on, which is pretty badass. It's like, oh, like, did you learn that in Tunisia when you were, like, with Ralph? And she's like, no, like a dance academy class, because she comes from a very, very well-off family, so that's probably something like, oh, from years ago that like she's applying to now. It's like, it was almost that like very artistry to it, like, especially because I've got it in my mind. It kind of very much reminded me of Parker from Leverage. Like, Parker kind of was, that's a very like Parker move what she just did, especially like like I said, it was very like beautiful and artistic, because it makes sense to why the music was added to the singing in that regard, because it's meant to be like dance. In the art form of thievery, it was just kind of a beautiful display of skill. But I also love that even though this thing is pretending to be Cecile, it's still kind of bumbling. And I guess that's supposed to be kind of like, oh, Cecile kind of has like a bumbling, she can be like a little bumbling in certain regards. So it's just kind of like her coming down from the ceiling being like, that's why I hate rock climbing. It's like, you're like this villain in disguise. And I guess like you're leaning into like the whole Cecile thing. So it's interesting too, because it definitely felt like Sue picked up. At first I was like, oh, Sue knows something's up with Cecile or something like that, because it turns out like she was looking like, but it's like her thief instincts were kicking, and she's like, doesn't it seem a little too easy? We literally just got the info like an hour ago, and already we're like, something's just, it's like, it's like we haven't really done a good enough job casing the entire joint. But Chester is so like, nah, I gotta do this. Like, Barry's in trouble. I need help him. Like, nah, I got this. I gotta. He's almost like feeling like he's got to prove his worth to Team Flash, even though he's already been a big help to Team Flash before now. But now he's not. He doesn't like have Cisco kind of help guide him. It's like, because before he had Cisco's help to kind of lean on, but now it's like, right, I kind of have to. He probably kind of felt like he didn't have anyone to lean on in this particular situation. So, sadly, Cecile ends up getting the mask and causes Sue to kind of trank herself, because it took a while. Like, Iris is the one who ultimately ended up figuring out, because all the while, like, we'll focus on everything going on inside of Cecile's mind, but they start noticing that there's like another brainwave, a third brainwave, and that's when it kind of clicked. She was like, right. She thought about last episode when like Allegra was like, oh, why were you at that crime scene? And she's like, oh, I got something work on. And then like start realizing like Cecile just kind of been pointing them in a certain direction. And it's like, wait, that's not Cecile. So sadly, Sue is kind of very harsh towards Chester, because it's like, right, he didn't listen to what I had to say. I told him that this seemed a little too easy, and Chester's like, yeah, she's right. I got tricked, but obviously Iris is like, the rest of us got tricked too. I mean, hell, even Joe didn't really notice a difference in Cecile's personality and stuff like that. That's a good mark of a con, I guess, But it's like, Chester's kind of beating himself up about it, because for him it's like, he's like, I didn't come here to replace Cisco. I came here to work with them. And now it's like, because he's like, and Iris is like, Cisco wasn't Cisco just because of like, he immediately got everything first. It's like, no, I get it. Like, it worked so well because he has such a great bond with you guys. But like for Chester, it's like, I don't have that. I don't really know you guys that well, and it's like, and Iris has to point out, it's like, yeah, but like, that's the thing too. Like, Cisco didn't, like, we had to like slowly build up our bonds over years. It's been 7 years of us doing this thing together, why we know each other so well. It takes time and patience. Like, I think the thing is, like, Chester, he just felt like he kind of had to prove himself, when in actuality is, you don't. Like, we trust you. You've got our backs just like we got yours, So I thought that was kind of, like I said, an important step for Chester, and it's kind of like handling things, but also to know, like, it's like, right, like, and it's something they say in this episode, like, use your voice. Like, you have a voice, Chester, and it's always going to be heard here as a part of Team Flash. So make sure you use it, But, that's all the stuff with Cisco. I mean, jeez, that's a the fact is, I accidentally said Cisco's name. I was trying to say Cecile, but the fact is, I said Cisco. Is just interesting, But the thing with Cecile, like, obviously Barry wakes up inside of that cell with her, and obviously it's like she's been here for, like, I was like, oh yeah, all that stuff with the storm, that was 2 weeks ago. It's like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, she's been here that long. Barry can't get them out because this isn't, his powers don't work here. But obviously he's familiar with it. Until he brought it up, I was like, oh right, you have been in this situation before. Like, literally, Grodd. I let that slip my mind. It's like, right, that's actually the reason why you and Grodd are on good terms now, because of that episode. I forgot about that. It was also an interesting, like, the moment, like, Cecile was kind of obviously afraid to even leave. I was like, there's something definitely going on here. It's like, I was like, and especially, like, when they left the room and just the way she had knowledge about the place, being like, oh yeah, it's only one floor. And I'm like, you know that because you've been here before. It's like a psychiatric facility. It's like, right. Because remember when Psych initially hit her, like, she was scared of, like, oh, like, her losing control of her powers and everything. Well, no, because, like, Psych didn't actually hit her, like, in it, like, her powers, like, were able to reach out to him. Like, her powers, like, clashed with his a bit. So that's what led to that. But, we had saw, like, oh, she was afraid of losing control of her powers, but it seems like now with this episode's context, we add a little more layer to that of, like, it isn't just being afraid of losing her powers, it's afraid of having a breakdown along with having her powers, I think, is where that kind of stemmed from. I was like, so that fear ran, like, even deeper than you kind of thought it did. So I thought that was so fascinating. So, but obviously they get confronted by that other Cecile, and it's like, she whammies Barry again, and they're kind of back in the cell, and Cecile kind of opens up, like, what happened, you know? Her mom was sick and got cancer and, you know, died, and she wasn't there. Like, she never got a chance to say goodbye, because her mom was like, oh, don't worry about me, I can feel I'm getting better already. And, like, obviously it's like she was, I think she was saying she was working in the DA's office, not as a DA at the time, but she was, she had gotten, like, a job position in the DA's office, and it was, I think she was, like, working when she found out about her mom, and it became too much, and she had a breakdown, like anyone would under their circumstances. And I think, you know, she was in this facility, and it's like, Barry's like, why didn't you ever tell anyone? Like, for her, it's like, she kind of left, when it was all said and done, she left the place feeling ashamed. And obviously that's, you know, a sad aspect of, like, you know, and that's a conversation that happens in episodes, like, mental health. Like, obviously the conversation has gotten better about, like, right, mental health is more on the forefront of, like, right, it's okay to have an open dialogue about it, you know. But she was kind of ashamed of it, which Barry was like, you know, she buried it, which Barry understands burying that pain. You know, he's like, I can't imagine what you've gone through, but I understand what it's like to lose a mom too. And for him, it's like, you've basically worn a mask to kind of hide your feelings, like, but burying those scars doesn't make them heal. It's not until you take off the mask that you can finally start to heal, accept all of that. Like, Barry, you know, considering everything that he's been through, with kind of, you know, that pain of what it's like to kind of, not the same situation, but to be in a similar situation in that regard. You know, interestingly enough, especially with, like, Psycho Cecile, it definitely felt, it very much reminded me of Persona in that regard, because basically that was the mask manifesting her fears like that, because we ended up interestingly finding out, like, the lightning that struck her wasn't from Psych. It was the mask disguised. I guess it felt like, oh, this is the opportune time to strike, like, with all this psychic energy, like, in the air, just because of, like, Psych's part to deal with the force storm and everything. So I guess it's been looking for a new host the entire time, and Cecile, especially because recently her powers have been growing too. So it kind of made, she was the perfect host because of, like, her psychic ability. So I thought that was such an interesting development on that front. But getting back to what I was saying, like it reminded me of Persona, in particular Persona 4 and 5, if you're familiar with them or not. It's all about like facing like the shadow version of yourself. Like, you know, it's this version of yourself, like your issues that you kind of like bury deep down. It's like confronting them. It's more so a 4 thing, because 4 was all about confronting yourself like that. I mean, it still applies in 5, but it was more so like what we saw with Cecile confronting herself like that. It was very like reminiscent of Persona 4 in particular. And but I thought that was so interesting, especially because of like the whole yellow eyes and the modulation on the voice. It's like that's how shadows worked in 4 as well, when like the main characters had to confront the shadow versions of themselves like that. Like I said, it applies a little bit in 5 as well, but obviously it works a little differently because of the whole like palace situation and like the characters. If you've never played Persona, none of that means anything, but it definitely reminded me of Persona in that regard. And so, because Cecile is becoming more open about the situation and she's not burying it all deep, like the fact that she's kind of, you know, confronting that fear, like the cell, you know, opens up again, and also like Barry's powers are starting to come back. He's like, I think you're going to be the one that's able to get us out of here, you know, because they found the portal before, but the other Cecile ended up shutting that down. So ultimately, like Barry gets blasted because he protects Cecile from the attack. But in that moment, it's like, you know, it's like the other Cecile taunting her, being like, oh, like your mom, like, you know, your mom died, asking where her sweet Cece was. The fact is that you weren't there for her, and you had to break down, and you're going to break down again, and you're going to be just like me. And she's like, that was my fear at one point in time. But that's, you know, I've kind of denied a part of myself, but I'm not going to let that control me anymore. She's able to break free. And then in that moment, she's like, you know, you can throw your fears at me, throw all this fear at me, but I won't, you know, she's not afraid to confront anymore. And her power is like, especially like, I like how it manifests, like, whereas that's the yellow, this is like, hers are kind of like rainbowish in certain respects, and ends up like a multitude of colors, and she ends up breaking free. And so at the same time on the outside, Cecile got in DeVoe, the Thinker's Chair, which is like, oh, that's interesting, because like literally the episode was with Psyche in the first place. Cecile ended up helping with that by getting in DeVoe's chair. Literally the episode was like, what, Fear Me, I think was the name of the episode. It was like episode, was that like 4 or 5 or something like that. And so for it to be a situation like that, I find so fascinating that it's like, oh, we're kind of back here again. It was almost like they were setting that up. Granted, yes, she only got whammied in the past, like, 2 episodes. She got whammied in episode 11. But still, it's still interesting that that would kind of come back like that. Like, oh, she would be. I mean, it makes sense. Psychic powers and everything, like, of course, like, this masculine one, because it needs to feed off of its wearer's mind, and this DeVoe's chair will keep a constant supply. If not, it would eat through Cecile's mind and need to move on to a new host, but it likes Cecile because she's a strong host. So Iris in conjunction with Chester, which I love him doing his like badass it kind of reminds me of like, there's promotional materials that show you like Alicia, like from Fear the Walking Dead, like obviously it's a picture of all the like characters, but like Alicia's like mid jump stab. It kind of reminded me of that. The chair did release that energy, and I'm like, is that something? Episode didn't make it seem like it was something, but I was just like, oh, I don't know if that's like psychic energy getting released into Central City, or is that just kind of like it's a byproduct of just like a chair's power. But I'm like, I feel like that's going to have some effect. Maybe, I don't know, we'll have to wait and see. You never know what's full setup for something. Usually if it's something, and they would have like made that the stinger at the like post credits of the episode of like, oh, and here's also post title card more specifically, but that it would have shown like there was an effect, or that still could be something later on. But you know, luckily Barry and Cecile are back and everything worked out. So Sue kind of apologizes for being a little too harsh on Chester, but it's like, hey, I'm gonna be kicking it in town for a while. I miss Central City, like, you know, Ralph's kind of doing his own thing. So that's gonna be interesting, having Sue around and what that necessarily entails. What kind of shenanigans that might lead to. But also you have Chester finally using his voice to be like, yeah, guys, if you want to just kind of do your thing, like, don't do it here. You could go on vacation or something. They're like, right. Let's end this conversation and kind of go our separate ways. But Chester, like, just kind of looking at Star Labs and just kind of like, I think, kind of taking it all in of like, right, I got this. I get, a little more confident, be a little more confident in himself. So I thought that was an interesting development. But obviously Cecile talking to Joe about everything. It's like, right, like, why didn't you say anything? And it's like, she's like, I didn't want you to see me any differently, which obviously for Joe, it's like a conversation, like, obviously that's a complicated conversation for us of like, I didn't know which way he was referencing that. Like, either, I mean, I think it could apply both ways, both as probably in the black community, like mental health sometimes, I think that they were kind of having that conversation, but maybe also their respective jobs, like him being a police officer, her being a DA, like a lot, like a lawyer, like a lot of, like, those are like high stress jobs that it's like, right, probably it's frowned upon for you to have, like, it's like the conversation about mental health, and I thought that was kind of a nice moment. And also, Joe letting her know, like, no matter what happens, like, I'm with you. I got your back. Like, you don't have to feel ashamed of that. But she's come to terms with that, because obviously she was talking to Barry earlier, being like, I don't think I would have gotten out there without you. And it's like, Barry's like, no, I know you, Cecile. I know you would have, because, I mean, you're the reason why we got out in the first place. That was all on you. So, but the information that Cecile had given him earlier in the episode, obviously it was the mask in control, but still, was the fact is that the information about Kristen, it turns out she went through an operation and she was the only survivor. No one else did. They were supposed to, like, they got ambushed. And now Joe is kind of thinking that maybe she was working with the enemy, and that's why she was the only survivor. Like, maybe that's why she's trying to bury this. She has talked a little bit about, like, she blames herself because it was like maybe this is a different operation or whatever. It might not be the exact operation she was referencing, or maybe it is, but, once again, maybe there's a different perspective on things. Like, once again, she presented herself a certain way that I'm like, maybe there's a deeper reason. Maybe there is a deeper reason for, like, this whole anti-meta stuff. So I don't know. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. But there's also, like, that whole element of I guess we're done with the mask for now, because Caitlin went, like, they made sure that there was no more, like, potentially of the mask reaching out to other victims, and they're dropping it off at Argus, which obviously earlier this week we had Diggle popping up in Gotham City. So, interesting. He was saying he was there for... do you think that's related in any shape or form? Like, his headaches and everything? I mean, I doubt it. Like, I'm sure that's something else entirely, but I just thought, like, oh, it's interesting. Like, Diggle probably hadn't been in contact with the mask, and they had immobilized the mask, so it wasn't doing that anyway, but it's just still something to kind of think about. But I'm also like, I don't know if I brought it up at the beginning of this review, but, like, I am surprised. I brought up that I'm surprised we're tackling this so soon. That, like, I was like, oh, like I said, she's only been like this for 2 weeks, and it's like we're immediately, like, after this stinger of last episode, we're immediately addressing it. But also the fact is, it's resolved so soon too. And I was like, oh, like, but I mean, I guess that's still out there in this continuity. So, like, there could always be something with that later on. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe this is also, like, progression for Cecile when it comes to her powers, having better control of them, especially because it's like she's finally, very Persona-like, accepted the parts of herself that she kind of buried away, so what that necessarily looked like and entails going forward is definitely going to be interesting to see. But I'm curious to see where all of this stuff with Kristen kind of goes going forward, so... But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.